Welcome to Great Automotive Lives. I'm your host, Andrew, the classic car guy. I'm a motoring writer, photographer, and now, inexplicably, in the chilly autumn of my career, a Johnny-come-lately podcaster. This podcast aims to bring to life the stories, histories, intrigue and drama surrounding some of the automotive world's most interesting characters. Some may be well known, others less so, but I hope you will find all, in some small way, warrant you investing a little of your listening time hearing about lives remarkably lived. If nothing else, I hope something you hear today prompts further reading, listening or watching. We are of course privileged, after all, to live in a world today where the ability to drink in fascinating facts and information is limited only by one's thirst for knowledge. All that said, shall we crack on?
Why the Life of Herbert Austin.
Those of us of a certain age will possibly not associate Austin cars with much glamour or prestige, nor remember them with particular fondness. BMCs and then British Leylands gobbling up of long-lived and illustrious marks of yore has much to do with this, I suspect. Strip away all the industrial strife and appalling management of the 1970s and 80s, and some truly remarkable makes, models and stories start to appear, however. One such is the great automotive life of Herbert Austin, a man who in later years looked like everyone's most frightening bank manager. Do you remember those? Who seemed to live a life of almost unrivalled achievement, determination and corporate bravery. The very opposite of a playboy, employees and peers of his would assert to time in his company as never dull. A relentless overachiever, there can be few so sensible-looking captains of the British motor industry that achieve so much in relatively short order. A great automotive life without question, and one I heartily commend to you.
The Life of Herbert Austin.
The 18-year-old Stanley Edge may have been filled with trepidation when he was summoned from the Longbridge drawing office to that of the old man. Herbert Austin was an autocratic leader, and whilst eminently kind and generous, he had the ability to strike fear into the heart of even his most senior employees. Poor Stanley must have been all the more nonplussed by the proposition Austin would lay before him. "Come and live with me in the big house for a few weeks, lad. There's something I need you to do for me." Luckily for Stanley, although he was sworn to secrecy, his quest would be very much of the platonic variety. On his arrival at Lickey Grange, I do the jokes, remember, Austin's home since 1910, young Stanley was first shown the lodge by a staff member. "This is where you will sleep." Next on the tour was the well-appointed billiards room. "This is where you will work." And then through large oak doors to the adjoining well-stocked library. "And this is where you will eat." Edge had worked at Austin since his 14th birthday in August 1917. Initially in the aircraft works. When the First World War ended in 1918, he managed to bag himself a place in the prestigious car design offices, where he and his work had come to the attention of Herbert Austin himself. Like so many across the world, the Great War had been devastating for Austin, both personally and professionally. His car-making business had started to hit its stride before the outbreak of war. Like many companies across the land, the commencement of hostilities meant Austin was suddenly in the munitions business by necessity. Needless to say, this was a role he would excel at. Austin put his skills in efficient production methods to good use too. No one else could get close to the price he submitted for the 18-pound artillery shells so desperately needed for the British war effort. During the Great War, more than 8 million of these shells were produced at Longbridge, together with 650 guns, 2,000 aeroplanes, 2,500 aero engines, and 2,000 trucks. The challenges involved with ramping up both personnel and facilities to handle this prodigious output were enormous and would have daunted a lesser leader of industry. As an example, the Longbridge factory was home to around 2,000 employees in 1914, and by 1918 the workforce had grown by well over 20,000, most of the growth coming from the female populace. During all this superhuman production effort, Austin found time, money and motivation to create a model village, and there'll be more about Austin Village later, in order to accommodate a proportion of this burgeoning workforce. This mushrooming headcount had led to more issues still at the war's end. Suddenly Austin was burdened with huge overheads that were no longer required for peacetime activities. The company just couldn't slim its wartime operation quickly enough, and by 1920 it was placed into receivership. Far more damaging than even this ignominy, however, was a personal family tragedy endured by Austin. Austin's second child and only son, Vernon, had been obsessed by the army even as a schoolboy. His favourite book was Deeds That Won the Empire, and his most persistent request was, "Buy me a bugle." During the Great War, Vernon served king and country as a lieutenant in the Royal Artillery. At age 20 in 1915, Vernon was killed in the execution of his duties at La Bassée in northern France. Faced with such crushing personal tragedy as well as professional travails of the highest order, most people would capitulate. Not Herbert Austin. No, sir. Austin doubled down and resolved to fix his company's malaise with an economy car for the masses, and perhaps ensure his mind was fully occupied to help drown out his grief. His fellow directors, and particularly the company's receivers, were decidedly unenthusiastic about a new project. Undeterred, Austin resolved to develop the car in secret, using his own money and resources. So Stanley Edge was selected, and one wonders if the loss of Vernon at age 20 influenced Austin's choice here, and he was squirreled away at Licky Grange. Despite the gulf between Austin and Edge in both age, Austin was around 54 at this time, and status, Edge later reported that their dynamic was surprisingly productive. He would say, "Whilst I was too young in those days to receive munificent recognition of my work, I was not too young to have argumentative discussions with Sir Herbert, putting forward my own views and mostly being listened to with great courtesy." Edge had never designed a car before, so relied on effectively sizing things up from existing drawings. Austin would arrive and put him right and specify lighter and smaller designs. It was a hand-to-mouth, seat-of-the-pants, against all odds development process. Much has subsequently been made of the design work being undertaken on Austin's billiard table. However, Edge later admitted that he did the bulk of the design work in an alcove at the edge of the billiard room. Eventually, development and Edge himself were moved back to the Austin works, and Edge recalled with pride, "I had produced drawings with proper tolerances on them, so they didn't have to change a thing." Quite an achievement for an 18-year-old and his first car design. In secret, a small team produced the first 3 Austin 7 prototypes, and the car was presented to the board and the receivers. As well as having ploughed a considerable amount of his own money into the design, Austin had prudently patented many of its innovations in his own name. This gave him significant leverage at this late stage in the process, and so the board reluctantly agreed to its production. In return for his personal investment, Austin was granted a 2 guinea royalty for each Austin 7 sold. Sales were initially sluggish, with 2,500 cars being sold in its first production year of 1923. Within a few years, however, the Austin 7 had put the Austin company back on the firmest of firm footings. By the end of production, over 290,000 Austin 7s had been sold, transforming car ownership in Britain and making Herbert Austin a significantly wealthier man. Of course, the Austin 7 didn't just significantly re-profile the British automotive landscape. It could be argued that without Austin and Edge's billiard room endeavours, there would be, for example, no BMW. The Dixie, an Austin 7 built under licence, eventually became the first BMW. Early Datsuns were outright copies of the 7, and the American Austin Company produced the Bantam from the Austin 7 designs and eventually used a basic example to produce a Jeep for the American military. Even Sir William Lyons of Jaguar fame started his career making custom versions of the Austin 7 called Swallows. After the war, both Bruce McLaren and Lotus founder Colin Chapman claimed some of their first motorsport victories in racing machines they'd created from old Austin 7s. A huge legacy for such a diminutive, some might say almost billiard table sized car. Herbert Austin, later Lord Austin and ultimately first Baron Austin of Longbridge, was born in November 1866. He was born at Grange Farm, Deep Mill Lane, Little Missenden in Buckinghamshire in the south of England. He became the second of 5 children of Giles Stevens Austin, a farmer, and his wife Clara Jane, the daughter of a customs officer. By 1870, the Austins had relocated to Wentworth Woodhouse in Yorkshire, where his father was appointed farm bailiff to Earl Fitzwilliam. Herbert Austin first went to the village school before continuing his education at Rotherham Grammar School. From as young as 6 years old, Herbert became an accomplished and prolific drawer. Most days, especially in winter, he would spend many hours at the household's large kitchen table, sketching various subjects with increasing aplomb. His favourite subjects, however, were always mechanical contraptions and contrivances. Visitors to the Austins' home would often marvel at how one so young could produce drawings so intricate and accurate, with realistic perspectives lending them an almost three-dimensional quality. His enrolment in Rotherham Grammar School necessitated a 10-mile round trip on foot, day in, day out, come rain or shine. At the grammar school he would further develop his artistic skills, as well as exhibit an interest in and a love for music. It was his drawing capabilities especially that led his parents to think that an architecture apprenticeship would suit Herbert well. It also helped that one of Herbert's uncles was the architect to Earl Fitzwilliam, and was open to having Herbert join his office. Herbert's heart was not in it, however, and pretty soon the apprenticeship was cancelled. To better suit young Herbert's mechanical leanings, his parents signed him up for a 5-year apprenticeship at the Great Northern Railways. With no vacancy being immediately available, Herbert would spend his time mostly drawing, winning local prizes and distinctions as he went. During this limbo period, the Austins would be visited by another uncle, his mother's brother, who managed an engineering works in Melbourne, Australia. The lure of an engineering career and a land of opportunity on the other side of the world was a heady draw for Herbert. He eventually persuaded his parents to let him join his uncle on his return trip to Australia. They arrived in Australia in time for his uncle to take Herbert to the 1884 Melbourne Cup horse race. The following day he would get an introduction to the engineering workshops of Scotsman Methven Ferguson, for whom his uncle worked. The compact shop contained a foundry, a small forge, some lathes and some drilling machines. as well as enjoying a sound overview of engineering practices while with Meth and Ferguson. He was able to continue his artistic endeavours with his part-time attendance at the Hotham Art School of Melbourne. After just a year in Australia, Austin would file the first of many patents to bear his name. This first one related to a locking mechanism for railway fish plates that joined the rails together. After around 2 years working with his uncle, Herbert moved to another Melbourne company that imported printing machines. After another couple of years, he was off again, this time to the Langlands Foundry Company. Austin would later reminisce that he had mixed memories of this particular shop, but I feel I owe it a very great debt of gratitude, for it was here that I received a thorough training as a mechanic. Whilst at Langlands, he would meet and fall in love with Helen Dron, an Australian whose parents had moved from Scotland and settled in Melbourne. 3 days before their wedding, Austin handed in his notice to Langlands, and the marriage took place on the 26th of December 1887 in Melbourne. Immediately after the nuptials, he started a job as manager for £3 10 a week with Richard Pickup Parks. They were developing and manufacturing a new innovative sheep-shearing machine for an inventor named Frederick York Wolseley and his Wolseley Sheep Shearing Company in Sydney. Almost immediately, Austin was able to identify a number of innovative ways in which Wolseley's machine could be improved. Rather than taking umbrage at young Austin's suggestions, Wolseley was impressed enough to offer the young Englishman a job as his chief engineer. Whilst at Wolseley, Austin would make a shrewd move that would serve him well again in later life. Austin took out a number of patents in his own name that related to important enhancements to the Wolseley sheep shearing machine. In due course, the Wolseley Company would acquire these patents in exchange for £85 ordinary shares in the company and an offer to Austin to run the British arm of the company. By November 1893, Herbert, Helen and their first child, Irene, were back in England. Herbert was soon busying himself sorting out the mess that was Wolseley's UK concern. This included the seemingly drastic measure of buying back and scrapping, at great cost of course, some poorly manufactured machines that had nonetheless been shipped to customers. In order to better control the quality of product, Austin would set up a manufacturing base in Birmingham. It was to fill the troughs in production at the Birmingham plant that Austin started to consider other projects. It had long been Austin's dream to produce a motor car, but he was unable to secure board backing for such a bold venture. Sound familiar? So, in another move that he would replicate in later years, Austin set about designing and building a car in his own time. Ultimately, the Wolseley Autocar No. 1 was born. It was a 3-wheel design featuring a mid-mounted engine and back-to-back seating. The first public showing was at the National Cycle Show in Crystal Palace, being priced at £110 for a 2-seater version and £150 for a 4-seater version. It came with a 6-month guarantee and the promise of a mechanic being sent from the factory at minimum cost in the event of a breakdown. In June 1898, Herbert Austin drove his Wolseley car to Rhyl and back, a distance of about 255 miles, averaging around 8 miles per hour, carrying 2 passengers and without experiencing any mechanical mishaps. The board were won over, and they agreed to fund a 4-wheeled car by way of a follow-up. This car was called the Wolseley Voiturette and was launched in 1899. In 1900, the latest model was entered into a 1,000-mile trial, which it completed with ease. On the strength of this showing, Austin was elected to the Wolseley board as a director in 1901. Almost immediately, however, the mercurial Wolseley board had lost interest in the nascent and clearly faddish car industry. Luckily, Thomas and Albert Vickers, directors of Vickers and Maxim, Britain's largest armaments manufacturer, had been impressed by Austin's achievements at Wolseley. so they took on his enterprise. When Austin's 5-year contract as general manager officially ended in 1906, they had made and sold more than 1,500 cars. Wolseley was the largest British motor manufacturer at the time, and Austin's reputation was made. By mutual consent, Austin's contract wasn't renewed following a fallout about engine types. This gave Austin a long-awaited opportunity to put his own name above the door of a motor manufacturer. With a small team, including Wolseley designer A.J. Hancock and Bobby Howitt as his private secretary, the first Austin was designed. It was ready for the 1905 motor exhibition in London, but there was no money available for a prototype. Instead, Austin was able to exhibit his drawings on the edge of a stand occupied by Harvey Ducross, who was then the sole importer of Mercedes cars. The drawing elicited a good level of interest and even quite a few orders. Now urgently in need of a production facility of some sort, Austin happened across an empty works facility in Longbridge, then a rural enclave several miles from the centre of Birmingham. The origins of the Longbridge works were as a tin printing and box manufacturing work built by the Birmingham company of White and Pike Limited. The original site consisted of a series of 20 or so fields bounded by Lickey Road, Low Hill Lane, and the Midland Railway's main Birmingham to Gloucester and Hales-Owen branch lines. White and Pike had to raise a substantial £105,000 to cover the cost of the new factory and construction work, and a new edifice was finished in the first quarter of 1895. Sadly, their venture was short-lived, with White and Pike closing in around 1901. The factory then stood vacant for around 4 years, which did nothing for its market value. Marketed at just £11,000, Austin would manage to seal a deal at a mere £7,500. Austin and his extensive staff of 3 moved in towards the end of 1905. Within a year, planning applications had been submitted to add a paint shop, a mess room, a cycle store, and a kitchen and toilet block. White and Pike's rectangular block was divided into sections, which were partitioned and subsequently further divided by glass screens, creating an enclosed, craft-like atmosphere. The expansion of Longbridge proceeded apace, with around 2.5 acres and 270 employed by 1906, but by 1910 it covered 4 acres and employed 1,000 people. As for Austin's first eponymous car, in April 1906 a large body of motorists travelled to Longbridge,
where snow lay full 3 inches deep on the ground and was still falling fast.
They were there to inspect the new car, and it was a conventional 4-cylinder model with chain drive. It was available as a 15-20 horsepower and a 25-30 horsepower model. The sole concessionaire for sale of the cars was Mr. Harvey Ducross, who had lent Austin a corner of his motor show stand previously. Austin's cars, like Wolseley, were considered luxury conveyances, and very soon the order book read like a who's who of the good and the great. At the outbreak of war in 1914, Austin manufactured bodies in Tourer, limousine, landaulette and coupe styles could be provided with engines of 15, 20, 30 and 60 horsepower. With a 1914 production tally of around 1,500 cars and over 2,000 employees, Austin was ranking 5th amongst British car manufacturers after Wolseley, Humber, Sunbeam and Rover. Austin took the company public in 1914, with its capital now standing at £650,000. All this in just 8 short years of the company's founding. As we have already heard, the Great War years were incredibly hard ones for Austin and his company. Despite this, he was able to leave another indelible mark on the greater Birmingham area during this time. In order to house some of the rapidly growing workforce at Longbridge, Austin would establish a model village which would house up to around 2,000 Longbridge employees. In November 1916, he decided to buy 120 acres of farmland in Hawksley Mill Lane from Thomas Middlemore for £7,750. Because speed of construction was of the essence, he purchased 200 Canadian cedar wood prefabricated bungalows from the Aladdin Company of Bay City, Michigan, USA. The $115,000 contract was agreed on the 20th of December 1916 with a down payment of $28,750. The company took out a mortgage in 1917 with the Secretary of State for War and the Minister of Munitions, which allowed it to have access to a maximum of £75,000 to develop the estate. Interest on the loan would be at 5.5% per annum. The estate was laid out in the shape of a horseshoe, and the main road through the estate was called Central Avenue, which at one end divided into a dual carriageway, which is thought to be the first dual carriageway in the city of Birmingham. Because of the fire risk associated with all that dry wood, 25 pairs of conventional brick houses were built to act as fire breaks, with one pair of brick semis to every 6 bungalows. Within just 11 months of construction starting, the last bungalow was completed and occupied. The bungalows featured a living room measuring 20 feet by 10, which you entered from an enclosed porch. There was a kitchen cum dining room measuring 10 feet by 10 feet, which included a gas cooker, gas washing boiler, sink and cupboard space. The 3 bedrooms were each 10 feet square, making for surprisingly spacious and sophisticated accommodation for the period. At the back there was even a large garden where vegetables could be grown and clothes dried on a long washing line. Despite being conceived as a purely temporary wartime structure, the original 15-year licence for the village was renewed several times. By the 1960s, the bungalows had been designated as permanent structures. What's more remarkable is that much of the village remains today and blends with later housing built around it. At this point in 2025, I note that an original cedar-built bungalow in the village will cost you around £250,000 to buy today. With the help of the Seven, Austin weathered the worst of the post-war depression and remained profitable through the 1930s, producing a wider range of cars which were steadily updated with the introduction of all steel bodies, Girling brakes and synchromesh gearboxes. In the run-up to World War II, Austin's range comprised the 2.3-litre Austin 16, the 1125cc Austin 10, the 1525cc Austin Light 12-4, and the replacement for the Austin 7, the unoriginally named 900cc Austin 8. The old man, as he was now fondly known, was as busy as ever running his Longbridge empire. His long-time personal secretary, Bobby Howard, was better placed than any to give us insight into the character of the great man. He would later tell a story that gave an insight into the old man's management style. Howard recalled an episode where the great man was reviewing the correspondence of his firm's shipping department. He read the first letter, and his eyes narrowed. He picked up the next letter, and the next, glancing in quick anger to the bottom of each. "Who signed these letters?" he demanded. "Send him to me." Puzzled, Howitt summoned the gentleman concerned. As he came in the door, Lord Austin observed dryly, "I see you've signed yourself as shipping manager." The man began to explain, but Austin cut him short and threw the letters on his desk. Then with careful emphasis he said, "In future, please confine your signature merely to shipping section. I'm the only manager around here." In his own words, Bobby Howard would recall about Austin, "From early to late he was on the job, and he expected his staff to be available also, with no eye on the clock. It was well known that he could do all types of work connected with a motor car, and in the early days he was not ashamed to take his coat off and demonstrate to a workman, who might seem a little confused,
the right way to go about it. He was plain of speech and in dress. He wrapped up very little in cold weather, and wore Burberry double-purpose type overcoats. In the early days he always wore a black bowler, but in later years this was superseded by a black Homburg type of hat, but in summer he favoured a Panama. He did not indulge in alcoholic beverages, neither did he smoke, and applicants for staff positions were carefully scrutinised for evidences of these vices. Too much colour in the cheeks or stained fingers were apt to bring the interview to an abrupt conclusion. Nevertheless, he had a predilection for tasty food, and did not appreciate a menu that included just plain roast beef, Yorkshire pudding and cabbage. Another of his aversions was for men with their hair parted down the middle. Bobby Howard was by Austin's side at the start of his company, as he was at the end of his life. Again he recalls, "The night before I began work there, he drove me to his home and insisted on my staying the night. At least, he decided, he would have one of the staff present the following morning. With meat sandwiches wrapped carefully for lunch, we drove into Longbridge in Mr. Austin's Wolseley. Already a draftsman was at work on the details of the first Austin car. The saga had begun. A full 35 years later, his faithful secretary would be the last employee to see Austin. Howard recalls, "Pneumonia began an illness of months, during which he directed the company from a room adjacent to his bedroom. Every inquiry about his progress received a typical answer, 'I'm getting better.' At 9 a.m. on May the 23rd, 1941, I arrived at his home as usual. His mind was as incisive as ever, dictating letters and giving directions regarding others. He signed the last of the morning's mail, a letter to his friend Bob Carlo of Glasgow, and I left at 10 o'clock. Just over 2 hours later, he was dead." A heart attack had finally done for Herbert Austin. He was aged 75 years old and had lived quite a life. Knighted in 1917 for his services to Britain's Great War effort. From 1918 to 1924, he served as a Conservative Member of Parliament for Birmingham's Kings Norton. In 1936, he was created Baron Austin of Longbridge in the city of Birmingham. Given that his only son Vernon had lost his life in the Great War, the peerage became extinct upon Austin's death. Within a year of Austin's death, his beloved wife Helen would also pass away. They are both laid to rest in the graveyard of Holy Trinity Church, Lickey, near his former home at Lickey Grange and close to the site of the Behemoth factory at Longbridge.
Summing up the life of Herbert Austin.
When I embarked upon my own journey of discovery about Austin's life, I admit to being less than excited. I had just written my Ferruccio Lamborghini script, and the Italian's verve, passion, and colour of his life seemed in stark contrast to the dour, worthy image of Austin. His later life photographs even reminded me of Dad's Army's Captain Mannering, all buttoned up with reserve and puffed up with his own importance. For me, however, this was a salutary lesson in never judging a sardine by its can. Despite my 3 preceding podcasts covering Charles Rolls, Donald Healey, and Ferruccio Lamborghini respectively, it soon became clear that the perennially black and white Austin's automotive legacy was by far the most significant of this quartet. None of the others could really claim to leave behind them a car that would so fundamentally alter the period that would follow it. The Austin 7 would not only democratise car use in Britain, but would go on to spawn other marques and inspire other automotive savants around the world. And once again it was a story of drive, Olympian work rate and perseverance beyond the pale. Austin's headstone could have read, "They said no, but I did it anyway." Yet again, I'm left in awe and feeling rather inadequate in the wake of my learnings. With Austin succumbing to a heart attack in 1941, all the nonsense of industrial strife and the bugger's muddle that would become British Leyland was certainly none of Herbert's making. A remarkable man in remarkable times, and surely a blueprint for a great automotive life.
In the footsteps of Herbert Austin.
If you wish to immerse yourself in the life and times of Herbert Austin, I congratulate you. I also sadly report that much of Austin's legacy discussed here has changed beyond recognition. Despite that, there are still ways to get a sense of the man for the perseverant. Here are some curated highlights to hopefully inspire you. Starting at the finish, one could always visit the last resting place of Herbert and his wife of 55 years, Helen. They are both interred in the graveyard of Holy Trinity Church, Rose Hill, Lickey. The church is a relatively modern construction dating from the middle of the 19th century. Possibly the next most tangible Austin relic is what still stands of his remarkable model village. There is much still to see here, although the village now sits within a wider area of more recent domestic residences. The clapboarded bungalows are still in evidence, as are the fire-breaking brick semi-detached houses. The best plan would be to head for Central Avenue in Longbridge, B31. There are a couple of blue plaques located here commemorating Austin and his innovative and forward-looking approach to employee housing and welfare. The nearby Longbridge factory has almost entirely been redeveloped now, having produced its final car in 2005. Today, the Chinese-owned MG Motors UK is based in a small remnant of the original factory, but it's not thought to be open to the public. Herbert Austin's last home of Lickey Grange still stands and is located at Lord Austin Drive, Marlbrook, B60 1RB. The house has long since been split into flats, with other private residences built in the extensive grounds. Today this is mostly a gated and private community. Perhaps your best bet to get a sustained Austin fix is to head for one of Britain's excellent car museums. My own favourite is the British Motor Museum in Gaydon. The British Motor Museum has loads of Austin exhibits and information, and have recently reached an agreement with MG UK to relocate and recreate Lord Austin's Longbridge office in the museum. Other fantastic museums to host extensive Austin exhibits include the National Motor Museum at Bewley, the Haynes Motor Museum near Yeovil, the Lakeland Museum in Ulverston, the Cotswold Motoring Museum in Bourton-on-the-Water, and the Great British Car Journey in Derbyshire. In the accompanying show notes you will possibly find links to these Austin-related tributes to assist your road trip planning. Happy motoring!
I truly hope you found today's great automotive life interesting, inspiring, or at the very least a useful jumping off point for your own onward journey of discovery. Much like an underinvested and dysfunctional mass transportation system, I'm reasonably likely to amble along again at some undefined point in the near, medium or far future to invite you to join me on another automotive tangent of discovery. Inevitably, and for the sake of brevity, the fascinating details of this great automotive life have been significantly distilled, and so preemptive apologies are offered for glaring omissions, of which there are probably many. Your input and feedback is welcome, of course, on the understanding that I'm pathetically thin-skinned, so go easy with me. A contact email address is trepidatiously provided in the accompanying show notes. Until then, please tell many others if you enjoyed this podcast, and even perhaps leave the 21st century's equivalent of a thumbs up at the Colosseum in the form of a warm and fluffy review. It not only helps me avoid becoming moodier and more irascible, but also helps others find the podcast and generally makes the world a tiny bit nicer for a vanishingly small number of people. If you hated it, tell no one. Until next time, dear listener,